Welcome back to another episode of FPO&G, Financial Planning for Oil and Gas Professionals. This week on the podcast, we're celebrating 100 episodes of FPO&G. And to celebrate, we're going to talk about Brownlee Wealth Management. We're going to talk about where we've been. We're going to talk about where we are today. And we're going to talk about where we're going. And I'm excited because the three of you who watch on YouTube will see Justin and I are recording in person. So this is, we're in the Fort Worth office. Since I'm a Texas resident now, we're going to start recording our podcast in person. So we'll see how it goes. And if it goes poorly, I want none of the blame. But if it goes great, I want all the credit. So I'm looking forward to starting to do these in person, Justin.
I love it. I do think it could be fun at some point on YouTube to maybe give a tour of our new office in Fort Worth, as well as office in the Woodlands, and then eventually the office that we're finalizing in Houston. So that could be pretty cool. But again, I want to highlight, Jared is now a Texas resident. And so pretty exciting. Other Texas news. A couple weeks ago, Jared, for the very first time, I got a truck. I've never owned a truck. And so I do feel like we are just all in on Texas, which is pretty exciting.
And it's funny for me because when I joined you, it was 2020. And I told you, I said, hey, I'm really excited about this and what this could be, but I'm not moving to Texas. And at that point, it was like everybody was virtual. All your clients were virtual. And you were okay with that. But the business and our lives have evolved over the last 5-ish years in ways we haven't anticipated. So I'm kind of surprised I'm here. Jared 5 years ago would be very surprised, but he'd also, I think, be surprised about the success we've had up until this point.
That's a great point. And yeah, what a fun opportunity for episode 100 to just dive into some of the story of Brownlee Wealth Management as well as FPOG.
Justin, I want to talk about how Brownlee Wealth Management came to be. Because as I was preparing for this episode, one of the things that was fascinating is you've been in the industry for over a decade before starting Brownlee, but it wasn't really on your radar, your 5-year plan to start a firm. And I wouldn't quite say you were an accidental entrepreneurship, but it wasn't your preferred path. And I would say starting a business, it's a labor of love. It's really involved. It's hard. And so how did you come to make that decision?
It is really fun to look back. So 2019, I started the firm. 2020, you joined. And if we think back to, the months or year leading up to starting the firm, it wasn't a life optimal time to do this. So I'm trying to think back. So Lauren, my wife, and I, we have 3 kids. And when I started the firm, Peter, our youngest, had just turned 1. And so our kids were 5, 3, and 1. And, as we all know, it's chaotic to have, a baby and toddlers in the house. And there's just so much that goes into it. And one story that really I just think about a lot that's it's really fun to look back on. Before I started the firm, so we were living in the Woodlands at this time, and a lot of our listeners can resonate with this. They're either in the Woodlands or they're in Houston, and they kind of understand the scope of houses there. But there was this house in the Woodlands, and it came on the market. So I want to say this was maybe early 2019, and this was my wife's dream home in the Woodlands. So before it ever came on the market, we would drive around neighborhoods on just when we were going on dates here and there. And this was always her favorite home. To paint the picture, it was a New England style shingle, cedar shingle home. And, it just looked like it was in Nantucket or something. And
which there's not many of those in the Woodlands from my experience there.
So true. I mean, come on. There's maybe 3 homes in the entire Woodlands that look like that have the cedar shingles that look like they're, just straight out of Massachusetts or something. And so this was my wife's favorite home. And I remember it came on the market, and I told her, hey, if I stay at the firm that I was at and continued in that role, we could sell our house and we could buy this home. And it would be our forever home. Quick side note, Jared, very funny to look back at what the list price was and know that, oh my goodness, today it would be, more than double what the list price was.
With a 7% interest rate.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So I told my wife, we could do this. But the thing is my wife and I were also having conversations at this time. I remember I came home from work one day and I told her, I'm pretty sure that I should quit my job and just start blogging. and to be more specific, just blog about very specific tax and estate planning items that are only relevant if you own a privately held oil and gas business or are at a super major and really at different levels within publicly traded oil and gas companies. And so I was very confident. Maybe some of our listeners have heard of White Coat Investor. 30-second summary, very fascinating. I think it's definitely worth sharing this. So White Coat Investor is a doctor. He's a medical professional, and doctors are, I'd go so far as to say doctors are victims of financial services. They are in the bullseye of salespeople, insurance sales, or just brokers, and everyone's trying to sell doctors stuff from financial service firms. And so this doctor was sold a few insurance policies that he absolutely did not need. He later went on to do an enormous amount of research. He's a smart guy. And the result of this was he realized that he just got taken to the cleaners. Like he was just really taken advantage of and sold financial products that absolutely were not in his best interest. And so he started a blog, and he calls it the whitecoatinvestor.com. And so I just loved this blog. It was excellent stuff. It dove into every area of financial planning and dove into, if you're a doctor, how do you make sure that you don't get worked over by a financial professional selling you things you don't need? And so, Jared, the idea for FPO&G was, hey, let's build the White Coat Investor for the energy industry. Let's build the White Coat Investor for oil and gas professionals. And BWM started in that same thing. But to answer your question, I do think it's important to highlight. I really didn't want to have to start a business. I talked to everyone under the sun in the greater Houston area to try and figure out, can I join a firm? Can I buy into a firm? Or is there a mature firm that I could just outright purchase to have a much more stable, easier entry into firm ownership? And frankly, Jared, I just couldn't find it. But, I also know that your path to joining was also not life optimal. And it was very much, you go back to 2020, and I kind of laugh looking back. I bet your parents or your in-laws, when you told them what you were doing, I bet they were freaking out.
Yeah, Justin, here's the thing. At that point in my life, I had just finished living internationally in Honduras after having quit my job and moved abroad. So nothing really surprised my family at that point.
That is amazing.
But what I will say is, at that time, prior to linking up with you, I was working with advisors kind of as an outsourced CFP. So if you needed help building financial plans, or if you needed operational help with like setting up portfolios, building models, optimizing software, I was doing that. But when you approached me, it was kind of really interesting because, I believe in the idea of going all in on a demographic, right? You just don't try to be a generalist or be all things to all people, really focus on serving one demographic well. And you were kind of getting traction with that demographic. And it was an interesting demographic because I love oil and gas professionals because, they're real salt of the earth people. They're white collar, but kind of feel blue collar. There's a lot of humility. And there's a lot of, I would say, like they skew engineer, so they skew technical. So it's like a lot of fun planning, and they like getting in the weeds. So it's a really fun client demographic to serve. But yeah, it did feel crazy at the time. And especially our arrangement was kind of unique because you had this opportunity and you said, hey, I would like for you to come on board, but I don't have any cash to pay you. So I'll give you a piece of the company in exchange for your labor and expertise. Because I think you saw where it was headed and knew you needed help today, but didn't really have the cash to do that. So it was kind of a unique arrangement, but it was, we both had to play the long game with it. And I think it's served us well up to this point.
It really has. And it's fun to think back to some of those early days. I remember thinking that maybe a 10-year vision is we're going to have, a number of clients, and we're going to be managing $100 million, which is, in our industry, that's a key mark because it means you're no longer regulated by your state securities board, and instead you're regulated by the SEC. And, obviously, Jared, I think we hit that in year 3, and now we're over 300 million. And so it certainly has been fun to look back and just see what else happened there.
Yeah, so I want to kind of dig in because, like, the way you framed it makes it sound even crazier than I initially asked. Because, right, like you had 3 kids and most of them were under 5, and that's chaotic. So like, what were and you tried to go to other places to find what you wanted. What would you say were the distinctives where like, hey, these 3 or 4 things have to be true of the firm that you were going to buy or join or link up with?
Yep, great point. I think a lot of our listeners can resonate with this. Go back 10 years ago, and I think the general thought process when you hire an advisor is, well, I mean, this kind of stinks. I'm going to have to go to, maybe it's going to be Merrill Lynch, Edward Jones, or it could, just be any big nationwide firm. And I'm going to hand them, let's just pick a big round number. I'm going to hand them $5 million and they're going to charge me $50,000 a year. And then after charging me $50,000 a year, they're then going to put my money in their own products that they can get kickbacks from. And they're going to make more off of that. And then you just start to do the math on that. And you're thinking, why in the world am I, going to pay them more than $1 million over the coming decades to just pick a list of mutual funds? And then, you read the Wall Street Journal and you start to get the picture, or you Google and you start to find out that, hey, actively managed funds they don't beat the index. And even the ones that do, you have no idea if they're going to continue to beat the index. So why in the world am I paying all of this money every year for something that's probably suboptimal? And are they even doing other things in my financial life? So I think there's 3 things that stood out to me that I could not find. And those 3 things, I would, I think it's fair to say those 3 things are what made it to where Brownlee Wealth Management had to be started, and financial planning for oil and gas professionals had to be started. And so I think the first one is very simple. Our listeners have probably heard this and they know this, but an investment firm that you engage, they must be fee only, in my opinion. They cannot be in a hybrid brokerage relationship. They need to be a fee only firm that does not have an ability to receive commissions, does not have an ability to receive kickbacks, and a fee-only firm that is legally obligated to be a fiduciary at all times. We've talked about it on this podcast, but it's pretty incredible that over the scope of the last 20, 25 years, endless amounts of money have been spent lobbying Washington, D.C. from financial service companies in pursuit of avoiding a fiduciary standard. And so it's kind of an ongoing battle that has had, a bunch of noteworthy events over the past decade or so. But I think that means a lot. I think if you're going to pay someone to give you financial advice, they should be fee only. They should be legally obligated to do what's in your best interest at all times. And they shouldn't be selling you products that pay them commissions or kickbacks. So that's number 1. A firm needs to be fee only. Jared, anything you'd add to that one?
No, I think just it gets back to alignment, right? And I would say like that that is gaining a ton of traction in media, in culture, in the industry. So like I would probably say that's the least distinctive. You know what I mean? So like, based on that, there's still thousands of, probably hundreds of great firms, even in the state of Texas, that could potentially meet that, or nationwide, let's say. But so what were the other 2 that really kind of, reduced the number of options down to 0 so that you started your own firm?
That's such a good point. Number 2 would be, is there a firm that is doing hyper-specific planning just for oil and gas families? And so something that stood out to me was, I think the biggest one is really NUA. So I remember at my prior firm, other advisors would talk about this in team meetings, that they have no idea what to do with NUA. They don't know how it's structured. They don't understand kind of the tax with it. They don't understand the classification within the greater estate plan. And they don't really understand how that NUA decision should then dictate cash flow planning, your portfolio, as well as a future Roth conversion schedule. And, I'm always careful. I never want to exaggerate with this stuff, but Jared, I really don't think I'm exaggerating. For the median person, whether it's ConocoPhillips, Chevron, whether it's ExxonMobil, and I'll just, any big oil and gas company that has an NUA component inside of their 401k, mapping that out correctly is worth an enormous amount of money in future taxes And then when you map out that correctly, and that's step one, that's really the foundation. When you map out the NUA election and then chart out future partial Roth conversions, Jared, we're talking about, in many cases, millions of dollars in taxes that can be saved over the coming decades. And so, I mentioned that to say the number 2 point that I was looking for that had to be present was there has to be a firm that is not just relatively aware or they remember reading about NUA in their CFP textbook. There needs to be a firm that is an expert in these things. I mentioned white coat investor, kind of go back to the medical industry super quick. When you get hurt, and let's say you hurt your knee, well, you don't go see a general practitioner for your knee, do you? No, there's literally doctors that specialize only in knee injuries. And so you go see that doctor. And if you have a different issue, you don't go see the knee doctor. You go see the doctor that specializes in exactly what your problem is. And so it just seemed baffling to me, kind of back to my original statement 2 minutes ago, how much of the industry was this absurd arrangement where you would pay tens of thousands, or in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees per year. And the advisor would just put you in a really bland box set of mutual funds that every one of their 10 million clients are in. They're not going to review your tax return. They're not going to read your revocable living trust or your irrevocable trust documents. They're not going to read your liability exposure embedded in your different insurance policies. And so they're really not doing high-level planning at all. But Jared, take it a step further. They're not doing any specific planning that you need, that your situation commands. And so, I think number 2, and gosh, there's probably multiple ways that we can dive into this, but it's, hey, there has to be a fee-only firm that is highly specialized in all of the tax, estate planning, and just general financial planning needs that oil and gas folks have.
Yeah. And I mean, you might be hearing that and think, oh, wow, that advisor, the standard advisor must not be doing anything. I think it just highlights the systemic issues that exist, right? Justin, how many clients did you have at your first firm?
Oh, man, over 300. Had I stayed, it was going to over 500.
Yeah. And the problem is the range of those people. You probably had business owners. You probably had people with federal pensions. You probably had doctors that are high income, high debt. You probably had some oil and gas professionals in there. And all those people have different complexities and needs. And you did not have the time to go as deep as you wanted to. And it was counterproductive to go as deep as you wanted to because you needed a baseline amount of knowledge, or really you could only apply concepts, or learn about things that were universally applicable to your client base. And again, if your client base is super wide and you serve everyone, I would argue you can't serve anyone well. So, I think that's also another key point. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the idea of, hey, a client to advisor ratio to really make sure, hey, not only do we say we have capacity to provide good service, but we've built it into the firm. And I don't think that's why you started it, but I think that's something we added early on that I think is important so that we can continue to do all 3 points with excellence.
Jared, that's so well put. And I think back to something you mentioned on point number 1. A firm should be fee only if you're going to engage them. But it is interesting to think through that, hey, fortunately, this is a good thing. Our industry is becoming better. There are more fee only firms. But even among the fee only firms, Jared, I mean, you could look at Barron's list of top firms that kind of just measure the giant nationwide firms. And they're going to have the problem that you just cited. They're going to have 300 clients per CFP, and those 300 clients are going to be scattered across 10 different industries. So there's not going to be common trades. That's way too many clients. You can't review 300 tax returns a year. You can't read 300 trust documents or anything close to that. But then, they're in all different walks of life. So you don't have the capacity to serve them, but also you're being asked to be an expert in 10 different, wildly different financial journeys. And so from a capacity or an expertise standpoint, the typical firm is structured in such a way that they cannot be experts in something hyper-specific.
Yeah, Justin, so talk about the third point a little bit, the idea of like a fixed fee and how you came to decide that is important. Because I would argue like there's more firms trying to do 1 and 2, probably not 2 to our specific demographic, but people are trying to specialize. People are trying to go fee only. But fixed fee is kind of probably the rarer bird. So how did you come to decide that was important to you?
So the biggest thing that shocked me about really just the benefit structure of super majors, but really every oil and gas company, and I don't think oil and gas people even fully get this. I don't think they understand the gravity of it. The typical retirement plan contribution from the employer side is legitimately 5 times more than the nation average. And so the average American has a 401k plan, and their employer is putting 3 to 5% into it. But the benefit structure of oil and gas companies is typically, hey, your 401k match, it might be 7 to 10%. But then you also might have another company contribution on top of the regular match. But then in addition to that, you're also going to have a pension, which the company is making a contribution towards at a regular clip. And that is also going in a pre-tax bucket. And so the end result of this is if you just kind of spend 40 years in an oil and gas company, it's very possible that you could never be close to, being CFO or anything like that. You don't have to be one of the top 50 people in the company to retire with $5 million. And so back in 2017, 2018, I started to notice this. And I mean, it just struck me that this demographic, the percentage of asset fee model, makes no sense whatsoever. It's easy for them to just hand over a portfolio. And again, there's a lot more people in oil and gas than other industries that reach those $4, $5, $6 million dollar marks and more. And so they're handing money over to, a firm that charges 1%, or they're going to get a little bit of a discount. So maybe it's 0.8, 0.9, and they're just paying an exorbitant amount every year. I think, and not to go too nerdy on financial planning as an industry, but Jared, I think the general fee structure made a tremendous amount of sense 20 years ago when, I put it this way, a top 5% family in terms of wealth maybe had $1 million. And so that percentage-based fee structure, they're paying $10,000 a year. That probably makes sense, assuming that really good planning is being done. The issue today, though, those numbers, because qualified plans and the IRS limits embedded within the qualified plans and overall company benefits has led to asset levels that are way higher. And so I would say that today. I don't think it's the end of the world if someone has $800,000 and they go to a 1% firm. I don't think that's the end of the world. But if someone has more than $5 million and they go to a percentage of asset firm, Jared, they are either A, going to be paying way too much on an annual basis, or B, and this might be even more absurd, they're going to do this absurd song and dance. Let's say they have $10 million where they get it. They don't want to pay $100,000 a year for someone to pick a list of mutual funds. And so what they do is they hand them $4 million and then they piecemeal DIY it on the side. And so it just creates this absurd dynamic. And it makes you, when you really dive into this, it makes you ask the question, why in the world is there not a firm that's doing comprehensive planning with this expertise? And why aren't they charging a fixed fee structure? Because as asset levels get higher, the percentage of asset fee structure, it's one, absurd from a price standpoint, but two, it also creates massive conflicts of interest that I think our fee structure helps avoid a lot of those.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would say fixed fee, it kind of creates a fixation on balance sheet optimization, not assets under management.
That's so
and
good.
I think that's the big unlock. And so I think, Justin, those three things, they've been proved out, right? I would say, if you and I had to take inventory, they've gone way better than we anticipated. So there's clearly demand for these in the marketplace. As you look ahead to the next 100 episodes of FPOG and next 100 episodes of the business, if you will, are you is the plan to do anything different or to just double down on what's made us great? And what are the kind of what do we want to be when we grow up, and how should our listeners feel about that?
I do think we're doing a great job hitting on those three things now. I really love that we can tell families that we're fee only, right? I really love that we're able to do hyper-specific planning. And Jared, I mean, how how cool is this? We kind of take this for granted because we're years into doing this. Jared, a ton of clients have their tax return done as part of our fee. And so we are just bringing so many more services under the scope that allows us to go deeper and do even higher levels of planning for our niche. And so I think, we're years into that, but it's fun to look back and say, hey, that's a big win. So I think we're continuing to get better at doing hyper-specific planning for the niche that we serve. This is a fun one. I'm really excited that, man, we say that we never want to have more than 50 clients per CFP, but really we would love to be well under that, and we are. And I think we can continue to be just incredible in that regards, because like you mentioned, it's not just, do you provide great service? The real question is, do you have the capacity to provide great service and do great planning? And then, it'd be kind of fun to calculate, Jared, what is our entire fee structure for every family we serve, and what would it be if we were just the median percentage of asset fee? I bet it's astounding on an annual basis right now, which pumps me up.
Yeah. And I think, to kind of piggyback on that, I would say, right, like, I think we want to be big when we grow up, right? Like, I think there's demand for what we have in the marketplace. And I think it's a really compelling opportunity for people entering the profession, right? We have 2 employees, both career changers. We're going to add another one in the next, starts in the next 2 weeks. Like, we're creating a really compelling career track where, like, the industry stinks in the way that hey, they hire you to be an advisor and they just sell. The pressure is to sell. It's like, you don't know anything. You don't know what to sell. You don't even know financial planning, right? So we're creating a really compelling opportunity from a professional perspective to come in and just say, hey, we want you to develop business eventually, but your goal is to learn and to serve. And I think it attracts the right people and it creates a really compelling opportunity relative to the industry. But, I would say I want to be big as long as these 2 things are true, as long as the client experience gets a little better every year and our employees get a little better and have a more meaningful work every year. And here's the thing I'm learning is we hire excellent people. Excellent people require upside and career trajectory, right? An A player isn't going to be good with cost of living adjustments every year. And so as we build out the team, I think we need to create opportunities for them. And I think there's enough demand to create opportunities for them. But I think what you're talking about is important. Hey, having the governors of, hey, I want to grow, but in a sustainable way that just compounds over really long periods of time, right? We don't need best in market, annual growth rates of our AUM or revenue. What I really want is just something sustainable over a really long period of time. And I think we have the governors and the people in place to do it. So I'm looking forward to what's ahead.
Jared, I love that idea. I think today, if there's just a family with a few $1 million that's heading toward retirement, I think we're incredibly well suited to serve them. If there's a family with hundreds of millions of dollars thinking through complex estate planning and tax planning issues, I think we're incredibly well suited to serve them. But how does that play out over the next 10 years? And it's really not any of the 3 points that we mentioned. It's a 4th point. It's people. All of that. If we are the best firm in Texas 10 years from now, that's going to be true because we have tremendously high-level people that are doing planning that is not able to be found elsewhere. And I think that's the key. It's almost as if, yes, those are the 3 things that made us dive into this at the origin, at the genesis. We want to be fee only. We want to do great planning, and we want to have a fixed fee structure, which was super strange and still is super unique. But the 4th component that ensures that, hey, this is how we are really the best firm imaginable. That's all centers around hiring great people.
Yeah. And I think the 3 tenets you built the business on: attract people, employees, and prospective clients in the door. But training and retaining is, I think, what will make this enduring. So Justin, I think that's a good place to wrap it up, man. I'm kind of blown away. It's a surreal moment being here. And I thank you, all our listeners who've come along the journey with us and given us feedback and listened diligently. I love logging in to track the podcast every Friday morning and seeing, our faithful listeners who listen to the episode right when it drops, to see that number increasing. So we're grateful you've come along with us on this journey, and we look forward to many decades and episodes ahead. As always, love the idea. Feedback or just questions, comments, ideas for future episodes, podcast@brownleewealthmanagement.com. We'll see you next time. Thanks.